Hilary Clinton is in Saudi Arabia trying to shore up support for tougher action against Iran. Well, the U.S. Secretary of State flew there from Qatar, where she said, in Washington's view, Iran is, quote, moving toward a military dictatorship. Well, those comments come as the U.S. pushes for another set of international sanctions against Tehran over its nuclear program. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has expressed his doubts over just how useful those sanctions would be, calling for something for more immediate. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, Rosalind Jordan has a report.
During a forum hosted by Al Jazeera, U.S. Secretary of State Hilary Clinton said Iran is becoming a bigger threat than first realized.
We see that the government of Iran, the supreme leader, the president, the parliament, is being supplanted, and that Iran is moving toward a military dictatorship. Now that is, that is our view.
Clinton's allegation builds on a theme she and President Obama's national security advisor put forth on Sunday, ratcheting up the rhetoric that a new round of international sanctions would be aimed at Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards, with its extensive military and economic links across Iranian society, and that such sanctions could possibly lead to regime change. Just last week, the U.S. Treasury froze the assets of 4 companies whose profits the U.S. claims support Iran's alleged illicit nuclear activities. Clinton took pains to play up what she says are the very real fears of Gulf leaders about Iran's attempts to expand its military strength.
They tell me all the time that this is something that would cause them to have to react, and they don't want to. That's not something that they want to spend their money on, that they want to be involved in. But on the other hand, they don't want to live in a region where they feel threatened.
Clinton insisted the U.S. is willing to work with Iran as long as it's honest about its nuclear intentions. But while the Obama administration has tried to use diplomacy with Iran, it seems to be carrying a bigger stick these days. It's a strategy some analysts say could backfire.
I fear that this could be something that the Ahmadinejad government can use to their own benefit internally, and going out and saying, see, we said it, this whole thing about engagement was a ploy, the objective was from the outset regime change.
A serious round of visits by Clinton to Gulf Arab states aimed at convincing Gulf leaders that unless it's stopped, Iran really will pose a big threat to their stability. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's now take a closer look at the comments from Saudi Arabia's foreign minister at the news conference with Hilary Clinton. Prince Saud Al Faisal sent, quote, sanctions are a long-term solution, but we see the issue in the shorter term because we are closer to the threat. We need immediate resolution rather than gradual resolution. Well, the minister didn't identify a preferred short-term resolution. Talk more about this. Joining us now via broadband from Berkeley, California is Samer Shehata, a professor of Arab politics at Georgetown University. Sir, what do you make of the timing of these comments by the Saudi minister? What might be his motivation?
Well, I think that it expresses 2 things. First, I think it expresses frustration on the part of the Saudis that after now several years, we're still talking about Iran's nuclear capability and nothing really much has been done about it. I also think it expresses the intention to try to exert more pressure on Iran, to kind of increase the stakes, as it were, and so that sanctions, if they are to come about sooner and have more teeth, as it were. But what I don't think his comments mean is that Saudi Arabia wants, for example, or encourages an American military strike against Iran.
Do you think, though, that there's a bit or an element of impatience here, that the process of sanctions it views as being too slow? Or is this, you touched on this a little bit, that this is perhaps an attempt at a push? Is this an attempt at really trying to turn up the heat, so to speak, on the United States, possibly trying to embarrass it into some stronger action?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to be said about that. Of course, we're talking about the Obama administration and not the George W. Bush administration. So the Obama administration is much more interested in gaining some kind of international consensus, going through the United Nations, trying to see the full extent of diplomatic measures before even articulating the possibility of a military option. You'll note that Clinton went out of her way to say that a military strike is not on the agenda, as it were. So it's one frustration at the kind of length of time. Also, as you said, the Saudis are there in the region, and of course they experience Iranian hegemony and attempts to influence politics in the region much more so than countries further afield. And then it expresses another kind of frustration, really. And I think this is something that there's really no way out of, which is that sanctions themselves, even smart targeted sanctions that go against the Republican Guard, are really not a solution, even if they were to come tomorrow as opposed to, say, 6 months from now. We've seen sanctions not really work in many other places and in many other cases, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iraq under Saddam Hussein, or whether it's Cuba. So I think there's a general level of frustration, and there's really no way to easily solve this problem. And that's what we're getting out of Saudi Arabia, I think, in those remarks.
What other options, though, does the United States have, if not sanctions?
Well, there are, no good options, right? So one has to think about what the options that exist are and what the consequences. Of course, a military strike is an option, but there are all kinds of problems with that. A host of experts have said that a military strike is unlikely to work even if it was executed, because we don't know the extent of the Iranian nuclear production facilities. It's not clear that a strike would take significant amounts of those out. It might delay the development of nuclear capability, but it's not clear for how long. And then the costs of a strike are tremendous on the Gulf. The Gulf would be turned into a theater of war. There could be retaliatory strikes on American military installations throughout the Gulf, as well as Gulf states that are seen as willing accomplices, in this case Saudi Arabia. So that's certainly one option. It's not a good option. The case of sanctions are another option. A third option is some kind of negotiated settlement. And as we've seen, the Obama administration has been attempting to engage in that. And of course, much of this then could be seen as attempts by all parties to leverage a better negotiated settlement for all sides, right? So the Iranians want to extract as much as they can. The Americans and the Saudis, of course, want to not have Iran extract as much. So it seems like all of these three things are possibilities. None of them are very good, unfortunately. And I think that many people are starting to talk about the possibility of living with a nuclear Iran and what that would mean.
Okay, Samer Shahata, we appreciate you joining us. Professor of Arab Politics at Georgetown University. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, coming up in this hour of news, train services across Western Europe are disrupted.